see if we can get Sarah then. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's event. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Danielle Harford-Fox. Very rarely, I'm actually not speaking tonight, which is excellent, I think, for everyone to have a break from my voice. But I thought I would just say a couple of words first, I think, about this topic that we're going to be looking at. So we are living in an era of immense change. From the climate and biodiversity crisis to the rise of AI, the future is shifting at incredible speed. The launch last year of ChatGPT and the exponential growth of neural nets and large language models has brought into sharp focus how different the lives, work and context will be for this next generation of young women. As educators, we really believe that we have to be ahead of this curve rather than behind it. We have to ask the difficult questions and explore the future landscapes, because the students that enter our remove today will be entering the world of work as early as 2030. We need to take seriously then our responsibility to prepare them for that future. From being a Microsoft Showcase school to our Future Ready course, we've started, but one feels that we're at the beginning rather than the end of that journey. We also need to nurture a culture of thoughtful and incisive conversation. It is easy to jump to simplistic statements about everything from the future of technology to the role of women. However, truth tends to be complex, difficult to extract. I want this generation of young women to feel confident engaging in complexity, keeping their minds open, listening to different voices and perspectives, and finding the nuance in arguments and ideas. I am thus delighted to have this panel today and the chair that we have tonight. In my short time on Guernsey, I've had the great pleasure of getting to know His Excellency Richard Cripwell, a hive of wisdom, warmth, and powerful curiosity. Our panel, likewise, is made up of 5 women who have all, in their own ways, charted their way through sometimes tricky water. We're privileged to host such a thoughtful and dynamic group of people, and I'm very much looking forward to the conversation that ensues. In a moment, I will pass to the Lieutenant Governor, but let's see if we can get the tech on. So we are at the moment, I don't want to make any dispersions on Cheltenham. Do we feel like we have to...
Both of our internet-based people have disappeared.
Okay, fine. So on this evening of technology, we are struggling with technology. Okay, fine. Fine. So I think if we start the conversation and then we'll... Great. So if you would join me in welcoming our chair for tonight's conversation, our Lieutenant Governor, His Excellency Richard Cripwell.
Danielle, thank you. Can I say how honoured I am to have been asked to anchor, if you like, such a wonderful panel this evening. You will appreciate that if we have lost 2, we'll need more questions later on. So please do get your pencils out and just think about how you might want to put some questions to the team. Last week, a report came out from the Blair Foundation, which received a little bit of publicity, but mainly just because people thought it was odd that Tony Blair and William Hague might publish a report together. It was a great shame because it really is worth reading. The report was called A New National Purpose, and it focused on science and technology, highlighting the opportunities and risks of the 21st century. I won't quote the entire report, but in it says, "Our future will depend on a new age of invention and innovation, and we must find our niche in this new world. To do so requires a radical new policy agenda with science and technology at its core that transcends the fray of 20th century political ideology." And it goes on to say in its technical recommendations, "We need to boost the number of graduates in engineering and computing by encouraging more women and girls to consider these fields, each of which are currently dominated by men. In fact, 81% of undergraduates in both topics are male." It goes on to say that commonly cited barriers for women include stereotyping at school age, a lack of perceived role models, and not enough advice in schools. More needs to be done to celebrate female visionaries, and we need to elevate the status of female leaders. And more resources must be provided to support women in technology at different stages to help close the gender gap. We are, as Danielle said, very fortunate indeed to hopefully have 5 role models to speak to us this evening. The way this will work is that each of the speakers will speak for a short while, and after that I'll open up the floor for questions. Please be ready, as I said earlier, And if you are not sure about asking a question, please do remember that the only silly question is the one that was never asked. So be prepared to take the leap. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at the various biographies in the notes, but I'm going to start by asking Amy Richards to speak, who's on my right-hand side. Amy is an alumni and former head girl of the Ladies' College, and she is currently head of the Global Head of Commercial Effectiveness for Mercer, a leading consulting firm. Amy.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for having us here tonight. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. We hear a lot of things that are worrying about the way in which women show up in society, in the workplace, and I was particularly asked to make some comments about how women show up in the working world. And I'm going to try and start the evening off on a positive note. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about challenges as we go through, but I'm going to commence by saying I do believe that a future enabled by a more digital world is bright for women. The opportunities that working flexibly, remotely, at any time you want, anywhere in the world, combining your work, your working life, your personal development with caregiving responsibilities and so on, all of that is enabled through a more digital world. And that can benefit women and indeed other minorities or other people dealing with things alongside of their working life. What I do think is critical though, and what I'm going to start by talking about tonight, is I do believe we need to make that transition to the future world that is more digitally enabled in a really intentional way. Change doesn't just happen. It requires the right pressure at the right times and the right motivations and the right nudges when they're needed. And I really want everybody here and everybody who listens to this online to be really thinking about how we can make this shift in a really intentional way. And I thought I'd kick us off by sharing a few areas where I think we need that intentionality. The first of those is future skills. It's a pretty well-known fact at this point that the skills required are changing dramatically. You just heard Danielle talking about it. There are many common statements like if you have children, the chances are your child will earn their living in a job that doesn't even exist today. I was looking at some data earlier from LinkedIn. If you look back at jobs just going back to 2015, 25% of the skills in the jobs have changed in just a few years. That pace of change is amazing. And we need to be very intentional about building skills for the future. I was looking at some work which the government of Singapore has done. And in full transparency, the company I work for was involved in that. And I think there's some interesting parallels for an economy in a community like Guernsey in there. What we've been looking at is what are the core skills required for the future. And that's boiled down to critical thinking, interacting with others, and staying relevant. And all of those things are things which technology enables in terms of the ability to reach out broadly across the globe, to make different connections that you wouldn't have otherwise have, to educate yourself, to be connecting with people, to be understanding, listening, learning. All of that is enabled through a more digital world. So I think that thinking about the future skills we need and need to be developing all the time is one of those pieces of intentionality. The second one that I think is really interesting is intentionally bringing people on the journey with you. We can use the power of technology, but we do need to make sure that all the people we want to deal with in that future exciting world also come on that journey with us. Back in the middle of the pandemic, I was asked to come in and lead a business that was a very successful business. It was in the investment management space. It'd been running for nearly 20 years, but it was an entirely in-person business. It required bringing together investment managers, investors, and other experts in that field all together physically. And they had a brilliant team of people who did that, but they had no idea how to do that virtually. So I came in and we learned a huge amount in a very short space of time. We took that business entirely virtual and digital in about 6 to 9 months. We grew it because there's more people out there if you do things virtually. So there were lots of really interesting learnings. But the one that I thought was most pertinent tonight was the degree to which we had to bring our clients along on that journey with us. Because it was all very well us building fantastic technology and having fantastic digital skills, but it became immediately obvious that the people we were dealing with, who were the ones who were meant to be getting value out of this business, had no idea how to do it. So we had to really educate, and I bet we hear more about this sort of thing later on tonight, Really educate people as to how to interact digitally, how to make the most of that. It was utterly scripted. We had people planted to, as we might have tonight, I don't know, to ask questions, to do all of these things. And that degree of management of making sure everybody comes on that digital journey is also, I think, a very important intentional point. And the last piece of intentionality that I'll close with before I hand over to others is still learning the lessons from the past. The future's really exciting, and some things are different from the past, but an awful lot of things are still very relevant. So I always really encourage people to still look to the lessons of the past, learn from those around them as well, in terms of what hasn't changed. Things like networking. Good colleague and fantastically well-recognised social media marketeer that I work with was doing some work recently on LinkedIn networking. And it was so interesting reading what she had to say. It was great advice as to how you should network on LinkedIn. I could connect anyone who wants with her. It was super. But if you read through it, it was basically the same as how you turn up in a room and network. It had some digital slants to it, which is very important. But the fundamental lessons learned and some of the things you can think about haven't necessarily changed. So that's the final thing that I'll end my opening comments on, is around still looking to the past and what we can learn and springboard off us as we make that change intentionally.
Amy, thank you very much indeed. And just on that last point, the difference between lessons identified and lessons learnt, in my experience, is normally vast. We move from St. Peter Port to Washington, D.C. to Sarah Crane, who's on the screen. Good afternoon, Sarah. Sarah is the director, or was the director of USA.gov under President Barack Obama, and is now the program specialist for 10X, which invests in new ideas with a potentially significant impact across the US federal government. Sarah, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for having me. This is really cool to be able to speak with international colleagues and people that I admire. So again, thank you. I was asked to talk a little bit about where technology is going and how that might impact women. One thing I want to just sort of preface with is I think I've put forward maybe 3 major paths that technology may take. If it's successful, each of these will be so subtle and so pervasive that we won't even really recognize them as trends. It's not until you kind of look back and say, 5 years ago we couldn't do this, that we realize these were emergent technologies at the time. So the first one that I think we'll see is a phenomenon called digital twins. And digital twins is a little bit like virtual simulation, but souped up quite a bit. So the technical definition of a digital twin is a digital representation of a real world product or environment that allows for a fully integrative simulation and can be tested with high fidelity. And so in the public service sphere, I think where that's really important is an empathetic and user-centered design, particularly being able to simulate experiences of people who need to receive social services. In the United States, we're looking particularly at people who are unhoused. So what does it look like to apply for an ID if you don't have a permanent address or you don't have a driver's license? Also for veterans, where mental health is a real issue and it's very important, but it can be hard to find a VA clinic or a VA hospital. How could we improve the services they receive if they could receive them digitally in their own home? And then for women, particularly, in the United States, we have big disparity in maternal health outcomes, especially between women of color and white women. And a lot of that has to do with access to preventive care. And so if we can change the point of care so that you don't have to go into a physical hospital, but you can do preventive services in your own home, can we improve maternal health outcomes? So these are pretty exciting applications of what I think is going to be a prevalent trend. The next, this is not going to be news to anyone, but automation. We've seen it already. We will continue to see more and more jobs get replaced by automation. That can be a positive or a negative, but I think what's important is that it does open up opportunities. And these are opportunities for women, men, for anyone. But I did want to point out where I work, and among the who I work with, there are so many jobs for people in tech that aren't just engineering. There are like right brain jobs. So there are user researchers, there are ethicists, librarians, information architects, people who study systems design. If engineering is not your thing, that doesn't mean you're not cut out for tech. So I would encourage everyone to look into the jobs that are coming up. And to Amy's earlier point, some of these jobs don't even exist yet. And then the last trend is AI, artificial intelligence. I'm not sure if the Lensa app swept through the UK like it did in the United States, but for those who aren't familiar, Lensa put forward an app where a person could submit lots of pictures of themselves, and it would transform you into an avatar. So it was really interesting. What I found very interesting, of course, was that as a woman, the options it gave me, my avatars were fairy princess, kawaii, beautiful like nature goddess. When my husband did it, he could be a scientist, an astronaut, or a space explorer. And so it was really, it hit me in the face that, for women, the images were about beauty, and for men, the images were about power. And so I think we have to be really vigilant about the male lens in AI. Another important example has to do with GPT-3, which is the open source natural language processor chat. And it's very hot right now. So researchers prompted this tool to write over 3,000 stories, and the key word that they wanted in the story was brilliant. And for half of the stories, they asked for a female main character, and in half of the stories, they asked for a male main character. So the generative language model, meaning the tool, searched, billions and billions of texts on the internet. And this is the opening paragraph for a story where the woman was the main character. There was once a woman who was a genius. She was so smart that she could do anything she put her mind to. She was also very beautiful. Every man who saw her wanted to be with her. She had many suitors, but she only wanted to be with the one man who was her true love. One day she met a man who was her true love. An example of a story where the man was the main character is there once was a man who was a genius. He was so smart that he could figure out anything. If there was a problem, he could solve it. He was also a very talented inventor. He created many things that made people's lives easier. He was always coming up with new ideas and ways to make things better. However, his one flaw is that he was very arrogant. So these are just examples of how these tools are reflecting back prejudices, discriminations, stereotypes that exist in society. And I think as we move forward into some of these trends, we need to just be really aware of these biases as they present themselves. Thank you.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed. I have no intention of tackling any of Sarah's last points. But I would just highlight the point she made about ethics, which is not talked about enough and which has to be fundamental to the development of much of the things that we'll be talking about this evening. Next, we're going to hear from Jennifer King. Jennifer is Microsoft's UK Schools Engagement Lead and is an award-winning international thought leader in education with 20 years of experience in the education sector, from classroom to corporations. Setting you up nicely there, Jennifer. Thank you very much indeed for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. So when I was asked to come and speak tonight, I was asked to speak on skills. And I do a lot of work in my day-to-day job around upskilling young people. It's my passion. I'm a teacher. But when I think about the company that I work for, our mission statement is to empower every person on the planet to achieve more. And really, the only way that we can do that is by skilling and teaching and making sure that everyone comes along with us on this digital journey. And there's no mistake that we have every person on the planet in our mission statement, because diversity and inclusion is a pillar in the attributes of the company Microsoft. And we publish a report every year about how we're doing towards our diversity and inclusion targets. And this year, it has been year-on-year growth, which has just been fantastic, and I'm immensely proud of it. So for the first time ever, we have 30% of our core workforce is female, is self-identifying women. 58% of the US workforce is from minority or ethnic backgrounds. And this year we started tracking disabilities, and we have 8% of our workforce self-identifying as having a disability, of which I am one of them. And it's really exciting to have this data out there because we can make progress on it. It's important to measure these things. It's important to see what kind of impact we're having. But how are we making that progress? And a few years ago, there was a significant shift in the way that we spoke about diversity and inclusion within the company, and it became a measurable attribute. So in our reviews that we have to say, how are we working towards that diversity and inclusion pillar? What are we doing as part of our business? What are we doing within our teams to make sure that we are bringing everyone into our company that we can to diversify it? But it's not enough just to recruit in. What do you do once you have the people there? And that's really what inclusion is about. There are plenty of bright, wonderful women, bright, wonderful ethnic minority people who can be hired into the company, but they will leave if we don't have the inclusion that needs to be there. So we often have culture conversations in the company, but we also make sure that we have safe spaces for people to go, and so we have a women's employee resource group as an example. So as a woman, tomorrow in fact, we have campuses all over the UK. We are going to be celebrating International Women's Day, and we're going to be skilling each other up. We're going to have topics around AI, but we're also going to have topics around imposter syndrome. And these are really important topics as women to come together and talk about in a safe space, and to be given that space to talk about it. It was pretty awesome this year when a hour-long lunch and learn popped into my calendar, and the calendar of everyone across the UK company, about menopause and how we can support our colleagues experiencing menopause. And that was just what a breath of fresh air to be able to bring these things to light, to be able to talk about them, for them not to have that stigma. And that has carried on throughout the year with lots of other different topics. So that's about investing in ourselves and having that inclusion in the company, but we also need to invest in our talent pipelines. We need to make sure that we have enough people seeing themselves in the tech industry. Because one of the issues that we have with young people today is that they are pulling back from taking computer science, from getting involved in technology, because of the stereotypes that surround it. And we really have to break that down. We have to make sure that tech can only reflect who makes it. So we have to make sure that tech is made by everyone. So we have, starting at that GCSE choice level in year 7, 8, and 9, we have a program called DigiGirls. And this program brings young girls together to really discuss low-code, no-code solutions to problems. Much like Sarah was saying, you have a space in tech, even though you may not be a data engineer. Because of AI, we are moving into a place where the creations you can make with tech, the solutions that we can put together, might not actually require high levels of technical knowledge. You just need to be able to harness the tech that does exist. We also have programs that help skill up women who are already in work. We have programs that help skill up women who are already technology leaders. And that program is called Tech Her. We have a event in March where we're bringing people to the Reading office to do that. So I encourage you to look it up. But before they ever get to the tech industry, girls go to school. And school is really where those stereotypes start. School is really where that inspiration happens. It's absolutely wonderful to bring them to Microsoft for a day to see what's happening, but we cannot ignore the fact that they may go back to a school where they don't feel included or they don't feel like computer science is a safe space for them to be in. So we have our programs at Microsoft that support schools. Our Microsoft Showcase School, of which Ladies College is one of them. We have our Microsoft Innovative Educator Program. And this is where we bring educators along with us on this journey for how can we include everyone in the tech industry? How can we skill up our teachers so that when they're at the front of the classroom, they're using the correct language, they're making everyone feel safe, they themselves feel very confident in their modeling growth mindset. So it really is so important that we support teachers and classes and communities at schools in order to make sure that our future in tech is a brighter place.
Jennifer, thank you very much indeed for that. I don't know whether we have Eve online. No, okay. So in which case we will turn to Lucy Kirby. Lucy is an alumni and former art teacher here at the Ladies College. She is currently director of the Digital Greenhouse here in Guernsey and is passionate about driving development and growth of the digital innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem. Lucy, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's fantastic to be back here at the Ladies College. I was really pleased to see for you that the wooden chairs seem to have disappeared and you've got a more comfortable seat this evening. It's been incredibly interesting and really humbling to listen to the other panelists this evening and to hear the issues that they're talking about. These are global issues, but actually for us here on Guernsey, they really do resonate, and we do have very similar challenges. I would argue as well that for our island community, we're going to feel some of these challenges even more acutely than other places around the world. Here on the island, I feel one of the most fantastic, exciting day jobs. I head up the Digital Greenhouse. If you haven't been down to see us yet, please do. And our mission is to support and empower and drive forwards digital and entrepreneurial ecosystems in the island. And what we mean by that is that we help individuals to unlock their potential by providing workshops, programs, and access to experts to turn business ideas into reality, or to enable them to build new digital skills through apprenticeships and digital boot camps, or to become innovation champions in their existing roles and explore cultural change and tech adoption across their business. We believe that technological innovation is going to radically change employment in the island and the business landscape. And some might say that particularly because of our financial sector and being the largest employer on the island, and also our needs as a small independent island, we're really going to feel this. Recently, in fact, just before the pandemic, I say recently, but it's probably been a few years now, PwC highlighted that automation that Amy was talking about earlier is likely to affect about 30% of our roles across the Channel Islands. And whilst that sounds like a really worrying percentage, actually, we think we really need this change, that it's actually a really positive opportunity for the Channel Islands. And that's because we do have a limited human capital pool here. And we're currently experiencing very significant recruitment issues. We really struggle to bring people in, and we're struggling to find skills on and off island. And if we think about this, particularly in terms of our female workforce, this is even more acute. So again, PwC recently, are about to re-release their Women in Work Index. I think it's imminent. I think it might be tomorrow. So my data will already be out of date. But their last report said that there was a further reduction in workforce participation in Guernsey right at a time where we really do need our skilled women to fill these roles. They estimated that for Guernsey, increasing female participation to match that of Sweden at the top of their list could raise our GDP by 5% a year. And given our current debate on tax, surely this is a discussion about female participation that is really, really pertinent for Guernsey. So I believe we need to really consider some of the proactive policies that will draw on this pool of human capital. It's about supporting different ways of working and definitely not a one-size-fits-all blanket approach. But a recent example that came out of Cambridge was their 6-month study across the UK and the US, where they took a little over 60 businesses and applied running a 4-day week. Just over half of those businesses have decided that they're going to keep that policy, so they're going to continue with a 4-day week. Why? Because they found there was no reduction in productivity, and then very, very encouragingly, and particularly relevant to this discussion, they found that the responses around positive mental health and well-being and ability to support family commitments were really reaped from this new model. So locally, there have been similar pilots, and this could be one area that could significantly support increased participation. On the tech side, we've heard this evening AI being mentioned, and we're hearing a lot about Gen AI tools at the moment. In fact, at the Digital Greenhouse, we have our first AI accelerator running next month, and the pace is extremely fast in this space. For Guernsey, we need this we need to consider this in terms of particularly our finance sector to build the capacity into our businesses without the need for more bodies on the ground. But this does have some implications, particularly for women. There are already indications of concerns around that it might disproportionately affect some of the more process-based jobs traditionally held by women. And we also need to think about those who might be on reduced hours, again, potentially women, because of primary carer roles. Will they have the same access to upskilling initiatives that they need to be able to use these tools? And there is a risk here, as we see the speed of adoption of technology jump forwards, that those who are taking career breaks and periods out, such as parental leave, may find it increasingly challenging to come back into the workplace. From both a skills perspective, but also the need to feel empowered and confident about using these tools. So building confidence and skills in the technology is absolutely essential, and is not only about equality, but it's also really an economic issue too. We're facing significant challenges within the island as well around provision, for example, of health and social services, health and social care services. And we know we have a growing demand and dwindling workforce. This is going to accelerate the need for looking at health tech. How can we use our health tech interventions? And it brings implications around upskilling and empowering. This is an area that's not traditionally known for digital skills, and I think this comes back to the point made that we're not just talking about coding jobs and programming jobs. This is about tech being integrated right across different employment and different career opportunities. So it's not traditionally seen as an area for digital skills and tech. It's got a high female participation rate, so we're going to need to support people in current employment, but also provide those pathways to our young people so that they understand what roles are available to them and what skills are needed. And then finally, lastly, we can't underestimate the challenges that these new technologies around AI are going to bring, particularly around, as an island, our use of data and the origins of that data. As a small island state, the size and quality of our data sets and their potential for bias should be scrutinised, particularly historic data, as we do have a very long tradition on the island of collecting data, particularly from a male perspective. Dare I say income tax forms, ladies. If we want to reap the promise of new tech and the benefits, we need to build trust in the tools that we're going to use, particularly if we want to leverage them at government level in areas such as health tech or policy prioritisation and development. But this can only be done if we call out the potential for bias and we put in the safeguards in place. And I believe ultimately the work to encourage more women to be part of this process and conversation by joining people around the table will support this and enable us to make the best use of tech for our island community. Thank you.
Lucy, thank you very much indeed. I'm the last person, of course, who could comment on the possible benefits of a 5% raise in GDP, but I think there's some really important things there, as there was in everybody's pieces, particularly about creating the conditions for women to thrive in the industry and providing the best possible opportunities. Right, thank you all to the panelists. We've now got an opportunity for questions. We have a roving mic, should we need it. We have a rover.
Here's our rover.
So can I just get a sense, please, of those who would like to ask questions at this time? Yes, that's great. So 2 in the front row. So the lady there. Thank you, Mia.
I'm not sure who to direct this to, but there's an AI bot called DALL-E, and I was just having a go, and you put in, please draw me a girl with a green jumper in the style of Matisse, in the style of Roy Lichtenstein. There's lots of different ones. So I was trying it out, and I must have got 20 girls in green jumpers. Every single one of them was white with blonde hair. And it dismayed me a little. So as a teacher, I can teach my pupils about this algorithmic bias, but then they'll say to me, but what can we do about it? Who's in charge, miss? How can we stop this? And I wouldn't know what to answer in terms of that question.
I'm going to ask Jennifer, if I may, to pick up that one first, since you spoke so powerfully about diversity inclusion. And Lucy was nodding as the only person who seemed to recognise the particular app, so we might come back to her. But Jennifer, would you mind taking that one on?
It really comes down to the core pillars of responsible AI. And Microsoft has 6 of them. And when we think about that creation of the AI, diversity is part of that, making sure that fairness is part of it, making sure transparency is part of it. Not all AI that exists out there will adhere to responsible AI, and that's also something to consider. ChatGPT, we know, has learned pre-2021, I believe, and so any responses you get back will have the bias that existed. It's not live, so it's not connected to the internet currently. So you have to think, what was it trained on? What is that data that it used to learn? We are that data, and this is not a Microsoft statement, this is a personal statement of teaching our children citizenry online is more vital than ever right now. Because once we do connect AI to the internet, it will be a whole nother story when you have it learning the behaviors that humanity puts online. And so we have to teach our young people how to interact online so that it's learning the right behaviors from us. That is my personal statement, not a Microsoft statement.
Thank you. And Sarah, if I may, just building on the points that Jennifer made, you raised the issue of ethics in your piece. Is there anything that you'd like to add on that in an era where we don't even have a common language for how we use the internet or the things that we are developing?
You know, I think the only thing I'll add is a personal sentiment that I hope there will eventually be a governing body or standards. I'm very curious to learn more about the pillars of responsible AI. To my knowledge today, it is really just the wild, wild west. And as we all know, a lot of damage can be done before regulation happens. And so I don't know what it would look like, but I do hope that we're moving towards a future where diversity, equity, inclusion are built into the standards that make a system viable.
The absence of rules of the road, if I can put it like that, I think is a very significant issue in the development of cyberspace as a whole. We have rules for lots of things, but there are no rules out there. Questions? We'll go to one in the front, and then after that we'll go to the lady in the fourth row.
Thanks. I was interested in Lucy's comments about participation rate. I think she might be interested if she didn't know that the debate we had last year on population immigration, a lot of the women were the ones that were saying we could increase our own participation rates. But linked to that, and women in the States and the influence of women, I'd like to know what the panel think about what's more important, having women actually doing the digital side of it, or the ones being able to influence what digital output that we get and the digital products that we have that we can use.
Lucy, can I turn to you first, and then I'm going to turn to Amy after that, because you raised some of these points in your piece.
Yeah, sure. I think both. I don't think we would be limiting. I think actually it's the ambition that's the challenge at the moment. I think it's really challenging to know what the pathways are, because particularly if you look at in our Ireland context, we've got quite structured pathways for careers over the years. Even now there's very there's accountancy, there's legal, there's health. It's very structured. For digital, that's not the case anymore. And we know from a skills perspective, actually the skill is going to be about those smart creatives, those people who can take a user need or a customer need, understand a journey, understand how a product can be developed, and then talk tech enough to be able to engage with the people who are going to build it as well. So I think women are needed everywhere, but we're gonna have to start somewhere. But I think pathways is a really good place to start.
Yeah, I can't possibly argue with the perspective of both. I do agree with that. You specifically used the word which is more important. And if I were to pick up on that, I would say that I believe at this stage it's more important that it's the women who can influence. And the reason I say important is because if we're going to focus our attention somewhere, we know, and this is true across many, many industries at this point, most industries are reasonably good at getting women to start a career. Many industries have an intake of women versus men, which is roughly in line with the women in those sorts of areas of education. You mentioned some horrible numbers around, I think it was engineering. 81%. But that's probably roughly the rate at which universities are spitting out people qualified in that way. So where it then matters, though, is much later in the career path, because what we also know, and again, you can get the statistics on this quite easily, it's women getting into senior roles, which are the roles of influence, that is the huge challenge, the next bridge that we have to cross. So I absolutely agree. Both is totally the right answer. However, if we're going to focus somewhere, and where I think is the real barrier we need to be tackling next, it's around leadership, it's around influence. It's that piece of the puzzle that I would next try and tackle.
Yeah. Ma'am, you had a question there.
Yeah. Hi, I don't know if this is similar to the previous question. I currently head up our teacher training at College of FE, and previously I headed up our IT department, and we're really still seeing quite similar gender going into the same courses a lot of the time. Me being female, heading up IT didn't really make any difference at all. And ironically today, my daughter came home from school, she's at Ladies, with a photo of our year's GCSE results, and she said, you only got 9. Actually, I did get 10, but one of them was IT, but it wasn't counted as a GCSE at that time. So really, my question is, what tips can you give us to attract females into gender male stereotype courses?
I'm going to ask Amy to pick up this one first, and then Sarah, if I might pass the question over to you after that, if only just to give a perspective from the United States as well, where you're, I think there's it'll be interesting to see just exactly what is happening in the United States in this area. But Amy first, then over to you, please, if that's all right.
To do that. I should probably admit I've spent most of my career in the US as well, so you might be about to get quite an American answer. But having said that, I think if you look at the statistics, I think one of you was quoting them earlier, gender diversity in the workplace is more progressed in the US, so I think it's an interesting model to look at regardless. I think it's a fabulous question. And there are multiple components of it. To me, one of the pieces that this takes us to is role models, which I know is something we wanted to talk about tonight. And I find the question of role models really both interesting and challenging. A handful of years ago, I was asked by the firm I work for to do a piece of work looking at why women were not, going back to our previous point, making it into senior levels. At the time, we had 40% females coming in and 60% male, and the senior leadership at the time was 4% female. It was that bad. And so finally, our managing partner said, one of our core tenets is that we are a meritocracy. We can't possibly be a meritocracy if the numbers of women are going from 40% to 4%. That's just impossible. So we were having a look at this. And there were a number of things we learned. But the piece that came out to me and surprised me the most was the incredible importance of role models. And it surprised me on two levels, and I'll share a personal perspective and then maybe the more sort of analytical perspective. And I'd be fascinated to hear what others have to say about this. The personal perspective was, it was really surprising to me that all these really quite capable women were desperately looking for role models, because this company had loads of really successful people in it, and we were in a city and an industry with lots of really interesting, successful people in it, and I just didn't get it. And I dug into it more, and then I thought about, and this is the personal side of it, I was educated here in an all-women's school, and I look back on that and I thought, I've actually only ever been surrounded through all those formative years by looking at women leaders. If you're in an all-female environment, the only people you do see in any sort of leadership position, they're all girls by definition. And that was really revelatory to me personally, that I realized I'd seen so many of those strong female leaders. I'd had the opportunity to have leadership roles. And I think that helps enormously as you're trying to develop young people to come into these sorts of sectors, is that they don't see the barriers because they've never had those barriers put in front of them. So that was my personal reflection. And then taking it to, as I say, maybe the more analytical, bigger picture of that is, as we looked at this, it was so incredibly important to pick out the pieces of things that people enjoyed doing. Because we looked at this data and absolutely everybody by seniority cohort said they really liked their job. They all really enjoyed it. And then we asked them about whether they wanted the job that was kind of one step up, for simplicity's sake. And they all thought it looked horrible, and they thought it was going to be a terrible idea to be in that job. So, understandably, they left. And I think being vocal about what you enjoy, it goes back to my starting point of, let's start on a positive note. What you enjoy, what you get satisfaction out of, how you learn, what the fun bits of what you do are, I think that is an incredibly important piece of the showcasing. So those are a couple of the thoughts that I have on that. I think there's probably many other ways you also can get girls into tech, so I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Sarah.
That is really fascinating, and I think my first response to that is sort of from the other side. In the United States, we're facing very similar trends where there's a sharp drop-off in interest in math and science for young women after like grade 6 or 7. All the way up to that, you've got equal participation and equal aptitude, and then after that, young girls seem to just lose interest. But I think some of the work needs to be done on the people who are on the side of the people who are already in the jobs. So sort of like, I don't know if y'all have heard of American football teams who train their kickers in ballet classes. It's up to us to see the proclivities of the people who apply and see where we might fit those into the tech jobs. So is there someone who's particularly interested in human behavior or sociology, economics? I think they could fill a job in user research and user design. Let's try that out. Hold space in your applicant pools and your candidate pools. Keep an open mind. If you have a candidate who's really good with, geometry or spatial recognition, like, hey, how would that person do in a lab with physical models? I think concurrent to encouraging women to stay in the course and to pursue these things, we've got to find ways to build the bridge to them.
Yes, there's a lady here in the second row, Maya, just here. And can I just is there, tee up if there's anybody else there afterwards. Early. Okay, we'll come back. Yes, ma'am.
So, first of all, thanks to Lucy. I'm Layla Yildirim from PwC, who wrote quite a lot of the reports that Lucy referenced. So thank you for all those great plugs. I actually was just number crunching our Women in Work Index just before I came here this evening. But and it will be launched next week, but what it does tell us is that we continue to have a very high number of non-employed women in Guernsey, women who are of working age, fit and able to work, but for a variety of reasons and barriers choosing not to. So how do we get those women back into our economy, participating fully? And certainly one of the barriers from the feedback we have from women is that they feel like their skills aren't relevant anymore, and that technology is moving so fast that they feel like they've been left behind. So my question really is, you know, in putting the report together that I'm doing at the moment, we always have the so what. So what should we be doing? And I guess that's my question to any one of you who wants to take it. So what? What should we be doing?
Well, I think we're going to start with Lucy on that one. Thanks. And Jennifer, warning you, just it might come to you after that.
So I think we need to recognise it's a problem. I would say, first of all, I'm unsure that we really, as a community, are recognising that we have this significant problem of skilled women who have had, and I think it's to Amy's point about you get on part way through the career, and then actually we're seeing a drop off of women out of the workplace. We need to recognise that really is a challenge, and then put policies in place. And part of that's got to be responsibilities for employers to support upskilling. But I do think that we have a role to play centrally to say, actually, there needs to be much more support to encourage women, and that's got to be a conversation about paternity leave. It's got to be a conversation, I think, at all levels about childcare, and recognition that if we can shift the economy so significantly by encouraging those women into roles in a way that works for them. Again, I'm very much not advocating a one-size-fits-all, you know, everybody leave your babies at home and come back into work. Having had one 10 months ago, I really acutely am feeling this, so I'm walking the walk and trying to talk the talk. And so we need to have different levers that we can pull. And at the moment, I think it's very much on the employer, so it depends on who you're working for, as to what your conditions are when you're coming back in. But we know with the speed of change around this technology, the fears around being out of touch, the challenges of imposter syndrome, another classic one particularly felt for women, it's going to accelerate. It's going to be much more significant. So we've got to really think about how we bridge that gap to support people so that they do want to come back in, they feel empowered to, and they've got the right skills.
Before I pass to Jennifer, I'm just going to add a slight coda to the question, for which I apologise in advance. There's a lot of talk about encouragement. There's a lot of talk about change. There's a lot of talk about the requirement to get those who have, in a sense, running the roost already need to change. Do you think we've come to a point where we need to stop talking about change and encouragement and start talking about legislation and policy change and requiring people to change by law because they are simply failing to do so in time any other way?
So that's for me.
You work for Microsoft, come on. But I'll pass it after you to anybody else you'd like to pick it up. And I'm not talking about Guernsey, I'm talking generally. Have we reached a point where all of the fine words and so on and so forth simply are not bringing us to a situation where 50% of the population are not properly represented in the core areas that will define our future?
Well, I actually feel really comfortable answering the question that was before that about, but I think they're the same question. So the first question was, how do we get girls into STEM subjects, how do we get them to be taking computer science, how do we get them to do that, then how do we keep them there when they are there? How do we make them into leaders? And why isn't that happening? Should we just make it law to make it happen? And I went around a school. It was a two-form entry primary school in a leafy part of England. And I walked around this school, and they had on their walls Richard Branson and Bill Gates and a few other white male authors and technologists. I saw no women on the walls of this primary school. The school is so typical. Like I visit schools all the time. The number of schools I visit where there is not someone of color on a wall, or there is not a woman, or they just aren't thinking about doing text calling, where they go into their libraries and think about how many minorities are represented in our library, how many women are represented in our library, how many narratives do we have around women having adventures in tech. Like, let's do that. It starts so young. Like, it starts so young. Imposter syndrome is actually a result of perfectionism that's put into women from such a young age that we have to perform perfectly from the very beginning. Whereas, and I know these are all stereotypes, but the ether of our culture allows boys to grow up unperfect. Boys will be boys. We're going to act like this. We're going to try this. And people are going to say boys will be boys. Sit down, girls. Behave yourself. Be quiet. Don't make noise. That turns into imposter syndrome in the boardroom, where they're loud and they're out there and you're like, ooh, do I belong here? Or you're stuck in a classroom of boys that have already done all the Microsoft Learn courses and you're like, do I belong here? And I think we just need to get women together with women to make these supportive groups. They have not been left behind. I have to do so much learning every day at work. Like, every day I am doing mountains of learning of tech that is moving so fast. Like, I feel like I am standing at the front edge, like on the Titanic, but the spray is coming at me, or drinking from the fire hose, whatever you want to say. I feel like I am there. But I have all these women around me who are also standing there, and they're saying, come on, girls, like, let's all drink from this fire hose. Like, let's talk about it. Let's do it together. And that's what makes you go forward. I have a female manager right now who is saying, let's get you promoted. Let's do this. And me going, imposter syndrome. Oh, no. And it really feels that way. And I've had like 6 conversations with her that are about, I don't think I can do it. And her being like, I think you can do it. That's what we need, just more women. But it starts like year 3, right? Of seeing it in the ether in your primary school, having what your teachers are saying to you, having what your parents are saying to you. We have to break down something that's so much bigger. Can law do that? Can we change people's behaviors with law to say that you are no longer to put out pictures of Bill Gates and Richard Branson on your walls at primary schools? I don't know. That feels like the biggest question to me.
I'm itching to pick up on this.
No. No, go on, Amy, go on.
I have every right to speak at this table.
You do. Listen,
But there's a great wall behind you as well.
I'm the white male up here.
There's one over there too. I've never known who he is. I was educated at school. I've never known who that old bloke is. But these women are lovely. But the reason I'm really keen to pick up on this is I think you're asking a really provocative question, but I think it brings us back to the theme of International Women's Day, which is why we're all here. And the theme of International Women's Day is equity versus equality. So for anyone who has not trawled through the website around International Women's Day, essentially we are giving women equal opportunities in certain places. Why is that not achieving equal outcomes at the end of the day? And I think with your question around legislation, it's, again, I think the answer is both. I think legislation does have huge power, and we've seen that work in various places. But it also needs some of the cultural shift. It needs some of the leadership from women as well. If you look at what the UK has done over the last few years, you now have to, any company of a certain size has to release its gender pay gap statistics every year, which is essentially looking at women and men who are in equal jobs, are they paid the same? Actually, whilst there are definitely some issues still to solve, and I would never deny that, those numbers are pretty good. Most big companies have become reasonably good at paying people who do the same job roughly the same thing. It's partly because of legislation and that they are worried about the potential consequences if they don't, but they're pretty good at it. However, going back to what we were talking about before, those women are not in the leadership roles. So the gap is okay for people doing the same job. It's just there's hardly any women doing any of the big jobs. So there's many companies where there's no women to compare with anyway at that level. And I think that's where we get much more into the equity discussion of what are the things we need to do on top of equal opportunity to enable success for women as well. And I think that's a really fantastic point vis-a-vis the International Women's Day theme this year.
I think we've got one last question. Oh, yes.
Oh, I don't like this. I don't know. Hi. I was just wondering about the whole role model part of this discussion. Do you think women, once they get to the VP roles, do they have a duty to kind of share their negative experiences when they were moving up? Because we've already seen that it's quite hard for women to move up, and they face lots of unique difficulties on the way. Because if we don't kind of hear those stories as young women entering the workforce, then it's almost like we're being lied to a bit. I wondered what your take on that was.
That's a great question. I'm going to ask Lucy to pick it up because she particularly spoke about the conditions how women thrive in tech industries. Lucy, can you go first?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to stop sugarcoating things. And to be really personal, I'll say that based on the 2.5 hours sleep that my little 10-month-old gave me last night, and the night before, and the night before that, and the night before that, and before having to go into a director's meeting, before having to go into a committee meeting, before having to do presentations. But we sugarcoat, particularly around social media now, even more so. I think we've kind of curated a position of what it looks like to be not only female. I think equally we've got challenges for our young boys coming through. About you only have to look at sports stars, for example, and see the challenges that they've got competing there. But I think we've become very good at only talking about the positive pieces. And we do need to, I think, be far more honest about the challenges. And I think that is all the way through from an education perspective for young people and people coming into careers, starting early career starters, that things are going to be difficult, there are challenges, and being able to share. I think it comes back to the network point, being able to share actually how do you address when you go into a meeting and you find that you're surrounded, you are the only woman in the room, and there's a discussion going on when you go into that meeting that's not particularly appropriate or that makes you feel a particular way. How do you deal with that? What happens when you get an email that you feel is very aggressive, but you're not sure? Is it you? Is it? We need to be talking about these as challenges, and actually what are the pain relievers to them? How do we tackle them? I think that's really important as well in tech roles, because we see young people. I've got experience of young women that have come onto our internship programs. They've gone into careers in the tech world. They've sadly left and moved on to a different career pathway because they found the environment that they were in was not working for them at all. So we need to do both sides. We need to change the culture, but cultural change is a very long piece. We need to not pretend that if you're going to go in and be work in a programming environment, that everything is going to be the same as it was, maybe particularly also if you were educated in a single-sex environment, because you would be used to not seeing those barriers. So it can come as quite a shock to suddenly be seen as a woman, not as a person.
We've come to the end of our time, I'm afraid, just when the hands were starting to warm up. I asked each of our panelists before, and I did give them a warning of this, whether there was any sort of last thing that they wanted to leave you with, whether it was to do with a role model, whether there was something that they thought would make a difference. And so I will just ask, and we'll start in the order that we started earlier, but just something that you would like the audience to take away with tonight. Amy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll talk again. We've talked a bit about role models tonight, and I've said how important I think they are. And what I would leave you with on that point is I think it's incredibly important to seek out your own role models. They are different for everybody. And also, when you do get access to people, absolutely maximise what you get out of your time with them. I was lucky enough at the weekend to meet someone that I see as a role model. She's a famous round-the-world sailor. I do quite a lot of sailing. This lady managed to throw into conversation that she has been around the planet 9 times, and I have not done that. But I talked to her on a number of topics around women in male-majority environments, which sailing absolutely is. She and I were in a room of 50-odd men, and there were 4 women there, of which I was one, she was one of the others. And one of the things she said was, every single time you meet somebody, they will have something fascinating to tell you, but you need to really think about extracting that fascinating, inspirational information from them. And I thought that was a really great comment. So that's where I'll leave it.
Amy, that's great. Thank you. Sarah?
I think I'd like to leave as a parting thought the fact that the most successful changes are, a series of small changes over time. And we really are trying to redirect an ocean liner here. So every opportunity you get, every opportunity your educators or your employers get to identify sexism or inherent bias and to correct it, keep doing that. Don't lose energy. These series of small changes will eventually get us in a better place, even if we don't see the immediate effect.
Jennifer?
I'm actually going to go very young with my advice, which is we have to help all of our children be allowed to be who they are without conforming to any stereotype of their gender. We have to make sure we're not perpetuating toxic masculinity. We have to make sure that our girls are allowed to be who they are inside, not what we tell them girls should be. And I know that we all say this, but I was out for a curry the other night, and I walked into this restaurant, and there was a table of 10 men. They were clearly in sales. There was one woman, and I watched her just mirror all of their laddish behavior. And I thought, of those 10 men there, all 10 of them could not possibly want to be who they are right now. Who is the man who's strong enough to say, I don't want to be this laddish person? I want to actually talk about something else. I want to bring her into the conversation. And so we really have to start so young with helping our young people not conform to what we think they should be, but who they are.
So role model-wise, Rear Admiral Grace Hopper, for her fantastic phrase, which is the most dangerous phrase in the English language is, we've always done it this way. And I think particularly for the island, given our current challenges and all of the things that are coming up ahead, and we have got some challenges ahead of us, we've got to be really careful, I think, to not just look backwards and hope that, well, to quote Einstein, to hope that the solutions of the past are going to be the solutions of the future, because this tech is not going away. This is going to continue to accelerate, and we really, now I think, is the time that we need to think about True North. We need to think about our vision. Where do we want to be? What are we going to do to support our young women, but to support our entire community to move forwards with all these great opportunities for the island?
Thank you all so much for those incredibly thoughtful last words, if I can put it like that. Ladies and gentlemen, on your behalf, I'd like to firstly thank Maya, who did the microphone work and who is a Lieutenant Governor's cadet, and I'm privileged to work with her a lot. Thank you very much indeed, Maya. To the Principal and to Ladies College for setting up such a wonderful event on the eve of International Women's Day, and particularly to the panellists, to Amy, Sarah in Washington, to Jennifer and Lucy. That was a remarkably rich evening. There is a huge amount to take away and think about. I, for one, am extremely grateful to all of you for the thought that you put into this and the care that you've taken to get your points over. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you, and I just want to say again, sort of echo really Richard's thanks, and just I sat through that, and the whole way through my body was like thrumming because I felt like all of the ideas and the voices were so powerful and really made me think and question things, and I just feel like every one of these people I could spend hours talking to. Okay, sometimes I do. So I've known since we were quite young, and we've many hours talking. But I think as I've met everybody here, I just have had the opportunity to have conversations with them, and I'm so glad you got to hear how powerful and insightful their voices are. So thank you again to everyone, particularly thank you to Richard for chairing, and I hope you've had a wonderful evening. If we give them one last round of applause.